if you were to breach an exchange and you were to steal some of their coins, right? You oftentimes, like, the hacker doesn't necessarily even want the coins themselves, right? Like, they just want whatever domestic currency that they're using. And so one thing that they're trying to do is they want to convert this to something else. And I think, like, the public nature of the blockchain is kind of what flips this on its head, right? So if I take these coins, if I want to get rid of them, I almost have to try to do this in a timely fashion, because the longer I sit on them, the more that people know that, like, hey, those are those coins. And so maybe that doesn't matter necessarily to the other users, or maybe it does. But it's certainly going to matter to law enforcement and things like that. And so ideally, what you would want to do is you would want to be able to sort of get the coins from your heist, right? And then figure out a way to then turn that into the money that you want, without anybody being able to realize that it was you who took those coins, because you're trying to not only turn what you've stolen into some other form of money, but you're also at the same time you're trying to hide the fact that it's you. And so the quicker that you can make transactions to kind of break those probability models of law enforcement, like the better chance that you have of actually getting away with it without being identified.
Yeah. So, for example, suppose you're an above board exchange, right? And someone comes to you and says, we just acquired all of this Bitcoin through a hack, and we'd like to exchange that for dollars, right? As an above board exchange, you would probably say, no, thank you. This is going to be a huge headache when our regulator finds out that we knowingly helped you launder the proceeds of this hack. Suppose that you're not an above board exchange, right? Maybe you're willing to engage in a questionable transaction like this. Seems plausible to think that you would be more willing to engage in this kind of a transaction if you had some plausible deniability. If you could say, well, it turns out these were the funds from a hack, but we didn't know that at the time. But if the hack has been publicized and folks have already traced those transactions through the block, then there goes that plausible deniability, right? Folks know that you know where these funds came from. And so our assumption is that the quicker you try to launder these proceeds, the more likely you are to be successful. The more likely you are to find an exchange that will be able to convert those funds for you. The more willing exchanges will be, either knowingly or unknowingly, the quicker you try to execute that exit.
And so ultimately the idea that maybe these full blocks, block congestion, is less associated with breaches comes down to greed, that the criminals don't want to pay the high fees, or are there other factors as well?
Could be fees. It could be time. It could be time sensitive. So, you can always pay higher and higher fees to get into a block, but also at the same time, if you're you're drawing attention to yourself if you have to offer, very, very high fees to get your transaction into a block. And so, that's the critical point, is that these people are operating on a public blockchain and trying to be unidentifiable. And the other people who are also using this blockchain are going to have knowledge of breaches. They're going to have knowledge that, exchanges were hacked, and they're going to be looking for these things. The same thing with law enforcement, right? They might be looking for these, like, okay, somebody hacked this major exchange. Let's see if we can track down who those people are. If you're doing very large transactions and you're paying very high fees for those transactions to make sure that they go through much more quickly, first of all, you're losing some of the proceeds of what you stole by paying those fees. But then also at the same time, you're potentially calling attention to yourself by offering an exorbitant fee to try to get your transaction through immediately.
That makes sense. I mean, is this something that's unique to Bitcoin, or do we see any parallels in traditional finance, where maybe there's certain frictions that deter crimes?
Well, there are some parallels. So, and I guess this gets at, we want to recognize negatives as negatives and positive as positives, right? We're certainly not saying here that like congestion is a great thing. We all should just celebrate congestion and not look for ways of alleviating congestion. But we also want to recognize that there are some trade-offs here, and in some cases, criminals may bear the burden of that congestion more so than others, and so there's a sort of an upside to an otherwise negative thing. One area where there's a pretty clear link to traditional finance is traditional finance doesn't typically have real time payments, right? Oftentimes, if you swipe your debit card, that may look instantaneous to you, but your bank is actually in many cases waiting a bit before those funds are transferred from from one bank to another, right, on the back end. So it's not your bank, but the merchant's bank. But there are some places that have rolled out real-time payments, and one place is Brazil. And one of the things that they found when they rolled out those real-time payments is that suddenly there was a rise in crime, in a particular type of crime, the kind of crime where you kidnap someone, take them to an ATM, and then have them transfer money to your account. That is not the kind of crime that works out very well when it takes 3 days for a payment to clear. Assuming that you're not talking about a value sufficient to take someone's life for, right? If you're just thinking about petty crimes, right? You're going to leave that person, and then they're going to have 2 days and 23 hours to stop this transaction, right? But if you have real-time payments, then it's already too late to stop this transaction. The money is already moved, and indeed, you probably have someone else ready to receive and then send on that money. And it just makes that kind of crime much more viable when you have real-time payments. And that's what happened in Brazil, an uptick in that kind of crime.